The auditorium was full. Thousands of beings from dozens of species sat in the curved seats that rose toward the dark ceiling of Conclave Station. The air smelled of different atmospheres mixing together, filtered and cleaned by machines that hummed quietly in the walls. This was the annual military retrospective, a gathering where veterans shared their experiences from the wars that had shaped the galaxy. Commander Valeth Kor walked slowly to the podium at the center of the stage. His body was covered in hard plates, like armor that had grown from his own flesh. Scars marked those plates in patterns that told stories of 70 years of combat. His 4 eyes, set deep in his angular face, looked out at the crowd without blinking. The Veshans were known as one of the finest warrior species in the Galactic Coalition. They lived for battle. They died with honor. And Valeth was one of their most decorated soldiers. The crowd expected him to talk about tactics. Perhaps he would discuss the defensive formations used in the border conflicts, or analyze the naval strategies of the Mindari campaign. That was what veterans usually did at these events. They talked about movements and positions and strategic outcomes. Valeth did not do this. He stood at the podium for a long moment, his clawed hands resting on its surface. The silence in the auditorium grew heavy. Someone coughed. A chair creaked. "I am going to tell you the truth about humans," Valeth said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "I am going to tell you what the Coalition does not want you to know." A murmur ran through the crowd. The humans were still relatively new to the galactic community. They had joined the Coalition only 40 years ago, after first contact during the early stages of the Swarm War. They were considered strange but useful. Good fighters, unpredictable, dangerous in ways that were hard to define. There were many rumors about humans. Some said they could survive injuries that would kill any other species. Others claimed they formed emotional bonds with anything, even machines and animals. A few whispered that they were insane, that something in their evolution had broken their minds in ways that made them both terrible and wonderful. The Coalition government did not encourage these discussions. Official reports about human military performance were dry and factual. Numbers and statistics. Nothing more. Valeth looked out at the crowd. "You have read the reports," he said. "You know how many humans died in the Swarm War. You know their casualty rates. You know that they lost more soldiers, as a percentage of their population, than any other Coalition species." He paused. "But you do not understand what those numbers mean. You cannot understand because you were not there." He pressed a button on the podium, and a holographic image appeared in the air above him. It showed a planet, brown and gray, covered in the scars of heavy bombardment. Kareth Prime. The name sent a chill through many in the audience. That battle had been one of the bloodiest of the entire war. "I was there," Valeth said. "I was assigned as a liaison officer to a human battalion. The 47th Expeditionary Force. 200 soldiers." His voice grew quieter. "I watched what they did. I watched what they became. And when it was over, I was not the same." An old Corvith admiral in the front row leaned forward. His species were pragmatists, focused on territory and resources. They respected strength, but saw no value in sentiment. "What did you see, Commander?" he asked. "What is so important that you would make such dramatic claims?" Valeth turned his 4 eyes toward the admiral. "I saw the impossible," he said. "I saw beings who should have run, who should have surrendered, who should have done the logical and reasonable thing. And instead, they stood their ground. Not for glory, not for honor, not for any reason that made sense to me." He touched the podium again, and the holographic image changed. Now it showed a group of humans in battered armor, standing in the ruins of a building. Their faces were tired and dirty. Some of them were wounded, but they were smiling. One of them had written something on his chest plate in crude letters. The words read, "Not today." I asked their commander why they were smiling, Valeth said. They were about to die. The enemy was coming. There was no escape. And they were smiling and making jokes with each other. He shook his head slowly. She told me they were not smiling because they were happy. They were smiling because that was how humans faced death. Together, with laughter. The auditorium was completely silent now. Even the machines in the walls seemed to have grown quiet. The last straightened his back. The Coalition has hidden the truth about humans because the truth is frightening. It challenges everything we believe about warfare, about survival, about what it means to be a soldier. He looked at the crowd, meeting eyes with beings from a dozen different worlds. I am old now. I have fought in more battles than I can remember. I have killed enemies and watched friends die. I thought I understood war. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was heavy with emotion that his species rarely showed. I was wrong. I understood nothing. Not until I saw what humans really are. A young Deshan officer near the back of the auditorium raised her hand. What are they, Commander? What did you see? Valeth was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped away from the podium and walked to the edge of the stage. He looked up at the young officer, and something in his 4 eyes seemed almost sad. They are monsters, he said softly, but not the kind you fear. They are the kind of monsters that stand between the darkness and everything they have chosen to love. And they have chosen to love so much. So many. Even those who do not deserve it. Even those who would never love them back. He turned back to face the whole auditorium. Let me show you, he said. Let me take you back to Kareth Prime, to the day the line broke, and show you what I saw. Then you will understand why I say that humans are the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because of what they can do to their enemies, but because of what they are willing to do for their friends. The lights in the auditorium dimmed. The holographic display expanded, surrounding the audience with the brown skies and burning cities of a world at war. And Commander Valeth Kor began to tell his story. The sky above Kareth Prime was the color of old blood. Smoke rose from 100 fires across the city, and the ground shook with explosions that never seemed to stop. Valeth crouched behind a broken wall, his rifle clutched in his clawed hands, and watched the Coalition lines fall apart. That had happened faster than he had expected. The Rethak swarm had sent a new wave against their positions, millions of insectoid creatures pouring through the gaps in the outer defenses. They moved like water, flowing around obstacles, climbing over their own dead. Their clicking and screaming filled the air like a horrible music. The Mindari broke first. Their commander gave the order to retreat, and his soldiers obeyed without question. They were not cowards. They simply saw no point in dying for ground that could not be held. Within minutes, the entire left side of the defensive line was empty. The Corvith lasted a little longer. They fought with their usual cold efficiency, killing dozens of swarm creatures for every one of their own that fell. But when the Mindari retreat exposed their flank, they too began to pull back. It was the logical thing to do. Valeth understood this. He agreed with it. The Leshens taught that a warrior's life was valuable. That honor could be found in a strategic retreat, as well as in a last stand. He began to organize his own soldiers for the withdrawal. Then he looked to his right and saw the humans. They were not retreating. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on top of a burned-out vehicle, shouting orders to her soldiers. She was a small woman by human standards, with dark hair cut short and a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Her armor was scorched and dented. There was blood on her cheek, though Valeth could not tell if it was hers or someone else's. The humans were moving forward. Not back. Forward. They were filling the gaps left by the retreating species, spreading their thin line even thinner to cover more ground. Valeth ran to Vasquez's position. "Captain," he said, What are you doing? The line has collapsed. We must retreat to the secondary positions. Vasquez looked at him. Her eyes were brown and tired, but there was something burning in them that Valeth did not understand. We're not retreating, Commander. This is foolish, Valeth said. He pointed toward the mass of swarm creatures surging toward them. You cannot hold this position. You will be overrun. Probably, Vasquez agreed. She jumped down from the vehicle and landed next to him. But we're not going anywhere. Valeth felt frustration rising in his chest. The Deshans respected humans as fighters, but sometimes they seemed completely irrational. Captain, I am ordering you to fall back. As coalition liaison, I have the authority to, with respect. Commander, Vasquez interrupted. You can take your authority and shove it somewhere uncomfortable. She pointed behind them toward the center of the city. You see that big gray building about 2 kilometers back? The one with the blue lights? Valeth turned and looked. He could see the building she meant. It was a large structure, relatively undamaged compared to the surrounding area. Yes, what is it? Evacuation center, Vasquez said. 40,000 civilians are in there right now, waiting to board transports. Men, women, children. They're loading them as fast as they can, but the ships can only hold so many at a time. She looked back at the approaching swarm. If we retreat, the swarm gets to them before the evacuation is complete. If we stay, we buy them time. Valeth stared at her. Captain, he said slowly, you have 200 soldiers. The swarm has millions. You are proposing to sacrifice your entire force for civilians you have never met. That's correct. This is mathematically absurd, Valeth said. He tried to keep his voice calm, to appeal to reason. Your soldiers are trained warriors. They have value to the coalition war effort. The civilians are untrained, most of them not even of military age. From a strategic perspective, preserving your soldiers is more important than... Vasquez turned to face him fully. She was much smaller than Valeth, barely reaching his chest, but something in her expression made him step back. Commander, she said, those are people. Not numbers. Not resources. People. They have families. They have dreams. They have lives that matter. Her voice was quiet but hard. We don't do math with people. Valeth did not know how to respond to this. It went against everything he had been taught about warfare. Resources were resources. Some were more valuable than others. That was simply the truth, but Vasquez was not finished. She put her hand on his arm, and her touch was surprisingly gentle. Go if you need to, she said. Take your soldiers and retreat. We won't judge you. But we're staying. Valeth looked at her, then at the human soldiers around them. They were checking their weapons, sharing ammunition, helping each other tighten armor straps. One of them, a young man with pale skin and red hair, was telling a joke. The others were laughing. They knew they were going to die. Valeth could see it in their faces. They were not stupid or blind. They understood the situation perfectly, and they were laughing. Why? Valeth asked. His voice came out strange and rough. Why are you laughing? The young man with red hair looked at him and smiled. Because crying won't help, sir, he said. And if I'm going to die today, I'd rather die with a smile on my face than tears in my eyes. Captain Vasquez touched Valeth's arm again. You asked why we're doing this, she said. This is why. Because we're human. Because we look at those people in that evacuation center and we see ourselves. Our mothers, our children, our friends. We can't walk away from them. We're not built that way. In the distance, the evacuation center's blue lights flickered. Transport ships were rising into the bloody sky, carrying their cargo of refugees to safety. But there were so many still waiting. Valeth looked at the swarm, then at the humans, then at the distant building. He thought about his training. He thought about logic and mathematics and strategic value. He thought about honor. Then he thought about the 40,000 people who would die if this line fell. He raised his rifle and moved to stand beside Captain Vasquez. "My soldiers will stay as well," he said. "Perhaps we can buy a few more minutes together?" Vasquez nodded. There was something in her eyes that might have been gratitude or respect or something else entirely. "Welcome to the party, Commander," she said. "It's going to be one hell of a fight." The swarm's screaming grew louder. The ground shook with the weight of their charge, and the humans began to sing. The battle lasted for 3 hours. To Valeth, it felt like 300 years. The first wave of swarm creatures hit their line like a hammer. Valeth had fought the Rethok before, but never like this. Never with so few soldiers against so many. The creatures were everywhere, climbing over each other, their sharp limbs reaching and grabbing and cutting. The sound of gunfire mixed with screaming and the horrible clicking of insectoid jaws. Valeth killed until his rifle overheated. Then he used his claws. Then he picked up a piece of metal from a destroyed vehicle and used that. Around him, humans and Deshans fought side by side. A wall of flesh and armor against an ocean of enemies in the chaos. He saw things that did not make sense. A human medic, a small woman with gray in her hair, ran into the open ground between the defensive line and the swarm advance. There was a wounded soldier there, lying in a pool of purple blood. Deshan blood. One of Valeth's own warriors. "What is she doing?" Valeth shouted. "That is not her soldier. That is not even her species." No one answered him. They were too busy fighting. The medic reached the wounded Deshan. She was dragging him back toward the line when a swarm creature leaped at her. Its claw caught her shoulder, tearing through her armor and into the flesh beneath. She screamed, but she did not let go of the Deshan. She pulled him with one arm, leaving a trail of red blood mixing with purple on the broken ground. Other humans ran out to help her. They formed a circle around her and the wounded Deshan, shooting outward as they slowly moved back to the line. 2 of them died in the process. They did not hesitate. They did not ask if it was worth it. Valeth watched this and felt something strange in his chest. It was not an emotion he recognized. The battle continued. The humans began to run out of ammunition. Valeth expected them to panic, or at least to become afraid. Instead, they adapted. A sergeant named Rodriguez led a squad to a collapsed building nearby. They returned carrying pipes, metal bars, chunks of concrete. They made weapons from these things. One soldier created a kind of explosive using chemicals from a kitchen freezer and fuel from a destroyed vehicle. Another built a launcher from scrap metal and tubes. "This is insane," Valeth said to Captain Vasquez, who was directing the defense from behind a wall of rubble. "You are fighting a 1,000,000-creature army with kitchen supplies." Vasquez grinned at him. Her face was covered in dirt and blood, but she was grinning. "Welcome to being human, Commander. We've been fighting with whatever we could find since we lived in caves. Improvisation is kind of our thing." The improvised explosives worked. The swarm's advance slowed. For a moment, Valeth allowed himself to hope. Then the second wave came. This wave was larger than the first. The creatures came from 3 directions at once, flanking the defensive line. The humans responded by splitting into smaller groups, each one covering a different angle. They were spreading themselves too thin. They were dying faster now. Valeth found himself next to a young human soldier. The boy, because he was barely more than a boy, was shaking. His hands trembled as he loaded his weapon. His face was pale. His eyes were wide with fear. "You are afraid," Valeth said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir," the boy said. "I'm terrified." "Then why do you stay? Why do you not run?" The boy looked at him with something strange in his young eyes. "Because my friends are here," he said simply. Because those people in the evacuation center are counting on us. Because if I run, I have to live knowing I left them to die." He swallowed hard. "I'm afraid of dying. But I'm more afraid of being the kind of person who would let that happen." Before Valeth could respond, the swarm broke through a section of the line nearby. The boy, Private Thomas Chen, according to his armor marking, moved immediately. He ran toward the gap, toward the creatures pouring through. He held the gap alone for 11 minutes. Valeth counted. He could not look away. He watched this terrified boy, this child who admitted his fear so openly, stand against an endless tide of monsters. He watched Private Chun shoot until his ammunition was gone, then fight with a knife, then fight with his bare hands when the knife was knocked away. He watched Private Chun die dot, and in those 11 minutes, the rest of the squad repositioned. They closed the gap. They held the line. When Valeth looked back at Captain Vasquez, she was crying. Tears ran down her dirty face, cutting clean lines through the grime. But she was still giving orders, still fighting. "He was 19 years old," she said when she noticed Valeth looking. "He asked me last week if he could have extra dessert because it was his birthday." She wiped her face with a bloody hand. 19 years old, and he just saved all of us. An explosion nearby made them both duck. When Valeth looked up, he saw that Vasquez had been hit. A piece of metal from the blast had gone through her side. Blood, red human blood, was spreading across her armor. "You are wounded," Valeth said. "You must fall back. Let the medics help you." "The medics help you?" "Can't," Vasquez said. Her voice was tight with pain, but steady. "Not yet. Captain, you are dying. Probably." She pulled herself to a firing position, using a broken wall for support. Her rifle was heavy in her hands, but she raised it anyway. "But the civvies aren't clear yet. I can hear the transports still launching. They need more time." She started shooting. Valeth stood next to her and did the same dot around them. Humans were dying. One by one, squad by squad, they fell. But for every human that died, the line held a little longer. The transports kept launching. The evacuation continued dot, and through it all, through the blood and fire and death, Valeth began to understand something. These humans were not fighting because they wanted to win. They were not fighting for glory or honor or any reward. They were fighting because they were angry, not angry at the swarm, not angry at the war. They were angry at the very idea that innocent people might die while they could still draw breath. It was a fury that burned hotter than any weapon, brighter than any explosion. It was the rage of protectors, of guardians, of something ancient and primal that Valeth had no word for. And it was beautiful dot. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing he had ever seen. The lights in the auditorium came back up slowly. Valeth stood at the podium, his 4 eyes scanning the crowd. No one was moving. No one was speaking. The silence was so deep that he could hear the soft hum of the station's life support systems. He let the silence last. They needed time. They needed to process what they had seen through the holographic recreation, what they had felt through his words. He had lived through it once. They were living through it now, in their own way. Finally, a Mindari diplomat in the middle section raised one of her thin arms. Her species were known for their cold logic, their mathematical approach to all things. "Commander Corps," she said, "what you have shown us is impressive. Human resilience is well documented. But I fail to see why this requires secrecy. All species have their warriors, their heroes. Why is human sacrifice different?" Valeth nodded. He had expected this question. "You asked the right thing," he said. "Let me explain." He stepped away from the podium and walked to the edge of the stage. "I have fought alongside many species. I have studied many more. And in all my years, I have learned one truth. Every species fights for a reason. a reason that makes sense to them. He pointed at the Mindari diplomat. Your people fight when the mathematics favor it. You calculate risk and reward, cost and benefit. If the numbers say fight, you fight. If they say retreat, you retreat. This is logical. This is sensible. He turned to the Corvith Admiral in the front row. Your people fight for territory, for resources, for the expansion of your species' power. You understand war as a tool for gaining what you need. This is practical. This is reasonable. He touched his own chest. My people fight for honor, for glory, for the stories that will be told about us after we are gone. We seek worthy battles and worthy deaths. This is traditional. This is understandable. Valeth paused. Humans do not fit any of these patterns. He turned to face the entire auditorium. When I asked Captain Vasquez why she would not retreat, she told me she could not leave those civilians behind. When I pointed out that her soldiers were more valuable than untrained refugees, she told me she did not do math with people. When I offered her the chance to save herself and her soldiers with an honorable retreat, she refused. His voice grew quieter. I did not understand. I could not understand. Everything in my training, my culture, my very nature told me that her choice was wrong. It was wasteful. It was foolish. It was suicide. He shook his head slowly. It took me years to understand what I saw that day. Years of thought, of study, of conversations with humans who survived other battles. And finally, I found the answer. The auditorium was completely still. Humans do not fight for themselves, Valeth said. Not truly. They fight for each other. They fight for beings they have never met. They fight for ideas, for principles, for the simple belief that some things are worth dying for even when there is no logical reason to die. He raised one clawed hand. But that is not the secret. Many species have idealists. Many species have those who sacrifice themselves for greater causes. The secret is something deeper. Valeth lowered his hand. Humans have the ability to adopt. Not just their own children, but anyone, anything. They look at a stranger and decide, this one is mine now. I will protect this one. And once they make that decision, nothing in the universe can stop them. He turned to look at a group of human observers sitting in a far corner of the auditorium. I have seen humans adopt alien soldiers from species they have never encountered before. I have seen them adopt animals, machines, even enemy combatants who surrendered. Once a human decides you belong to them, you are theirs forever. They will fight for you. They will die for you. They will walk through fire and darkness and the jaws of death itself to bring you home. The Mindari diplomat spoke again, her voice uncertain. This sounds like a psychological disorder, an inability to prioritize correctly. Perhaps, Valeth agreed. By your standards. By my standards. By the standards of every logical species in the galaxy. He paused. But consider what this means in practice. He began to pace across the stage. At Kareth Prime, humans died for civilians of their own species. Understandable. But they also died for Theshan soldiers. For Corvith engineers. For Mindari scientists who had been cruel to them during training. They did not care. They had decided that everyone in that evacuation center was theirs. He stopped pacing. The coalition is now part of the human family. Do you understand what that means? Every species that signed the Alliance Treaty, every world that joined the coalition, every being that humans have met and worked with and lived beside. We are all theirs now. The Corvith Admiral leaned forward. You speak as if this is dangerous. It is, Valeth said quietly. Not to us. To them. He turned to face the Admiral directly. Humans are burning themselves alive, trying to protect the galaxy. They take every loss personally. They mourn every death as if it were their own family. They throw themselves into wars that do not concern them, into conflicts that benefit them nothing, into battles they cannot win, because somewhere, someone they have decided belongs to them is in danger. His voice grew heavy. I watched Captain Vasquez die. She held on for 14 minutes after the last transport cleared the atmosphere. 14 minutes of agony, with a hole in her side that should have killed her in seconds. She refused to let go until she heard the confirmation that the evacuation was complete. Valeth closed his 4 eyes for a moment, and when she heard that confirmation, she smiled. She was in more pain than I can imagine, her body broken, her life ending. And she smiled because 40,000 people she had never met were safe. He opened his eyes. This is the truth about humans. They are not the most dangerous species because of their weapons or their tactics or their physical abilities. They are the most dangerous because they care too much. They love too easily. They protect too fiercely. He looked out at the silent crowd. And that is why the Coalition hides this truth. Because if every species in the galaxy truly understood what humans are, they would have to make a choice. Fear them for their impossibly vast hearts, or love them for the same reason, and neither choice is safe. The memory came back to Valeth like a wound that had never healed. He was kneeling beside Captain Vasquez in the ruins of the defensive line. The battle was over. The swarm had retreated when Coalition reinforcements finally arrived. Too late to save most of the humans, but early enough to save the evacuation center. 40,000 civilians were safe. Flying through space toward distant refugee camps, Vasquez was lying against a broken wall. Her armor had been cut away by medics who had already done everything they could, which was nothing. The wound was too severe, the damage too great. Of the 200 humans who had stood with her, only 17 were still breathing. They gathered around their captain now, those who could still walk. Some held her hand. Others simply stood nearby, their faces empty with exhaustion and grief. Valeth stood with them. He did not know why. He was Deshan. This was not his death to witness, not his mourning to share. But something kept him there, something he could not name. A young human lieutenant was kneeling beside Vasquez, holding a communication device near her ear. Static crackled from it, mixed with distant voices. The lieutenant was crying silently, tears running down his face. Then a voice came through clearly. Evacuation complete. All transports away. 40,217 civilians confirmed safe. Repeat, evacuation complete. Vasquez's eyes, which had been half closed, opened fully. She looked up at the bloody sky, then at the soldiers around her. Then at Valeth. She smiled. It was the most peaceful expression Valeth had ever seen on a dying being. There was no fear in it, no regret, no anger at the universe for taking her life so soon. Just simple, quiet joy. We did it, she whispered. Her voice was so soft that Valeth had to lean closer to hear. We actually did it. The young lieutenant squeezed her hand. Yes, ma'am. We did. Because of you. Vasquez shook her head slightly. Because of all of us. Her eyes moved from face to face, touching each of her surviving soldiers. You were magnificent. Every single one of you. I am so proud. Then her eyes found Valeth. You too, Commander. You stayed when you didn't have to. You fought beside us. That means something. Valeth did not know what to say. Words felt inadequate. Everything felt inadequate. Thank you, he finally managed, for showing me what courage truly looks like. Vasquez smiled again. Not courage, she said. Love. It was always love. Her eyes closed. Her breathing slowed. And then, surrounded by her soldiers, under the bleeding sky of a world she had saved, Captain Elena Vasquez died, a Deshan medic who had been treating wounded nearby, began to weep. Valith had never seen one of his own kind cry before. He had not known they could. He discovered, in that moment, that he could too. The auditorium was quiet as Valith finished his story. He stood at the podium, his old body suddenly feeling every one of its 70 years. The memories were heavy. They had always been heavy, but sharing them made the weight somehow more bearable. A young Corvith officer near the back of the auditorium raised his hand. His voice was uncertain when he spoke. "Commander, you said the Coalition suppresses this information. But why? If humans are as noble as you describe, should that not be celebrated?" Valith considered the question. "It is suppressed," he said slowly, "because the Coalition is afraid of what would happen if everyone understood." Afraid of what? Afraid that other species would try to destroy humans out of fear, or that other species would come to love them. And humanity is not ready for either. He looked down at his scarred hands. Humans carry an impossible weight. They feel responsible for everyone they meet. They take on the pain of strangers as their own. They fight wars that are not their wars, die deaths that are not their deaths, simply because someone, somewhere, needed help. He looked back up at the young officer. If the galaxy knew the truth and came to depend on humans, to love them and rely on them for protection, that weight would become even heavier. And humans would try to bear it anyway. They would burn themselves to ash trying to save everyone. Is that not their choice to make? The officer asked. Perhaps, Valith admitted. But those of us who know the truth feel protective of them. We want to shield them, at least for a little while longer, from the full burden of what they are. He paused. It is strange. We have become like them. We have adopted them. We want to protect the protectors. A soft sound made Valith look toward a corner of the auditorium. A human woman was sitting there, dressed in the formal uniform of a Coalition ambassador. He had not noticed her before. She must have entered quietly during his presentation, thought she was crying. Silent tears ran down her face, but she made no sound. Her eyes met Valith's across the distance, and in them he saw recognition, understanding, and something else. Something like gratitude mixed with sorrow. She knew. She had always known what her species was, and she carried that knowledge like a wound that would never heal. Valith nodded to her. A small gesture, an acknowledgement between two beings who understood, something too large for words. She nodded back. The auditorium began to stir. Beings were talking quietly to each other, processing what they had heard. Some looked disturbed. Others looked thoughtful. A few, especially among the younger officers, looked at the human ambassador with new eyes. Valith turned away from the podium. His story was told. Whatever came next was not for him to control, but as he walked toward the exit, a thought formed in his mind. It was not a Veshan thought. It was something he had learned from humans, something they had planted in his heart during those terrible, beautiful hours on Kareth Prime. The thought was this: that love was not a weakness, that protecting others was not foolish, that sometimes the most logical thing in the universe was to stand between the darkness and the innocent, even when the numbers said you would lose. He had spent 70 years learning to be a warrior. On Kareth Prime, he had learned something more important. He had learned to be human. Not in body. Never in body. But in that secret place inside where decisions were made, where the soul lived, where the choice between running and standing was written. In that place, Captain Vasquez and her soldiers had left their mark on him, and he would carry it for the rest of his life. Behind him, the human ambassador wiped her tears and smiled. It was a sad smile, but also proud. The truth was out now, at least a little bit. The galaxy was beginning to understand . And perhaps, just perhaps, humanity would not have to carry its impossible burden alone anymore.